Welcome to Nightmare Coming, where folklore bleeds into reality. Every story you thought was just a tale has a truth waiting in the dark. One nightmare at a time, we dig deeper into what was left unexplained. If you dare to question what's real like, subscribe and share the story that still haunts you. Then, let's step into tonight's nightmare. Story 1. The Locked Classroom. I recount being trapped overnight in a classroom where desks seemed to shift and whispers circled the room. I remember the first time it happened like it just happened yesterday, even though it was years ago. I stayed after school to finish a project in one of the older classrooms at the end of the hall. The kind of classroom that smelled faintly of chalk dust and old paint, the windows too high to see out of properly. The janitor had left earlier that day, and the building felt unusually still, like someone had pressed pause on everything. I worked at my desk, the scratching of my pencil the only sound, until I realized the room felt off. At first, I thought it was just the quiet pressing on my ears, but then I noticed something small but undeniable. The desks weren't in the positions I remembered. A few had shifted slightly to the left, some pushed together in corners where they hadn't been earlier. I blinked, convinced it was my imagination, and went back to work, but then the whispers started. Soft, almost hesitant, coming from the corners of the room where no one else could be. I froze, straining to hear. The words weren't clear, but they carried a sense of urgency, like someone was warning me. I told myself it was the wind sneaking through the poorly sealed windows, or the way the old pipes groaned in the walls, but the air had been still. And then the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, my heart pounding, and rushed over to open it, only to find it locked. My key wasn't on me, and no one else had been there, at least as far as I knew. I banged on the door and shouted, but the echoes were muffled, and it felt like the room itself absorbed my voice. I tried the windows, but they were either bolted or too high, leaving me trapped with the shifting desks and the faint, urgent whispers. Hours seemed to stretch on, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Every time I tried to sit down, I felt eyes on me, like someone or something was watching from the dark corners, just beyond the reach of the overhead lights. I thought about screaming again, but the whispers grew louder, almost synchronized with the beat of my own panic, and I realized that if I called for help, I might only encourage whatever was in there. I spent the night crouched in the corner, listening to the desks creak and the shadows stretch across the walls, waiting for something to make a move, or maybe just to leave. Eventually, morning came. The janitor returned, unlocking the door with a tired, "Late night, huh?" And I tried to explain, but he just shrugged, saying that old classrooms can be strange after hours. He didn't ask, and I didn't push it. That was the first of many nights in that school where I realized the building had its own memory. The whispers weren't random. They were tied to the place, as if the room itself remembered the students who had sat there, the lessons, the mistakes, and it wanted someone to notice. Even now, years later, whenever I think about that locked classroom, I can feel the faint creak of the desks, the soft hiss of voices that weren't mine, and I wonder if it was ever really empty, if the walls ever stopped listening, or if I had just become another part of the memory it carried so carefully. Story 2. The Janitor's Warning. A night visit to the school revealed strange warnings from the janitor and doors that opened on their own. The janitor's warning came on an otherwise ordinary Thursday, but ordinary quickly became impossible to believe. I had stayed late again, helping set up chairs for a school event, and as I carried a stack down the long, narrow hallway near the gym, I saw him at the end, leaning on his mop, his face unusually serious. Normally, he was the kind of man who hummed while he worked, talking to no one but the floor tiles. But that night, he didn't say a word until I was almost at his side. "Don't go near the old science wing after hours," he said quietly, his voice low, almost a whisper itself. I laughed nervously, assuming he was teasing. "What's in there? Ghosts of bad experiments?" He shook his head slowly, looking down the hallway like he could see something I couldn't. "It's not safe. Things move when no one's looking. Doors open and close by themselves. People get lost." I smiled, but I didn't argue his warnings always came off like old-school superstition. Later, curiosity got the better of me, as it always did, and I walked toward the wing. The door at the end was heavy, and as I pushed it open, a chill hit me, the kind of cold that sinks past your clothes and feels like it's pressing on your bones. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, fluorescent lights flickering unevenly, casting long dancing shadows along the walls. I stepped inside, and immediately I heard it, the faint squeak of a door closing behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My flashlight or phone light rather revealed the same long corridor, empty lockers on either side, the smell of old chemical residue lingering faintly. As I walked further, I noticed that doors along the hallway were opening and closing on their own. A storage closet rattled as though someone were shoving at it from inside. I froze, my heart hammering, and listened. The sound of footsteps followed me, light and uneven, sometimes matching mine, sometimes lagging just behind, almost like someone was testing me, following my rhythm. I told myself it was the building settling, that old hinges creaked, that pipes groaned, but the doors kept opening and closing deliberately, and the footsteps never faltered. At one point, I turned to run, only to see the janitor's mop lying on the floor, inches from where I had stepped, though I had left it by the main gym. I tried to pick it up, but it slid forward slightly, as if nudged by a hand that wasn't there. I bolted down the hall, the lights flickering, doors banging softly, and when I reached the main corridor, the janitor was standing there again, mop in hand, silent. He didn't look at me, just shook his head and muttered, "Some things never leave." I didn't press him, didn't ask. I left the school that night with a strange sense of dread, and in the days that followed, I noticed small, inexplicable things. Doors in the old wing that were open when they should have been locked. Chairs moved out of place. The faint squeak of hinges even in empty corridors. Sometimes when the building is quiet and empty, I can still hear it, the soft, deliberate sound of doors opening and closing in rhythm with steps that aren't mine. The faint feeling of being followed even when no one is there. And I wonder, even now, if the janitor's warning was meant for me, or if it was only a hint that the school itself had a mind, a memory, a will of its own, keeping its secrets in the echo of footsteps and the swing of doors long after the hallways were empty. Story 3. The music room. While practicing alone, I heard instruments play by themselves and faint singing from an empty corner. The music room was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to practice in peace, but it quickly became something else entirely. I had stayed after school one afternoon to rehearse for the spring concert. The room empty except for me, the instruments neatly arranged, sheet music stacked on the stands. The smell of polished wood and brass filled the air, comforting at first, until I realized it was too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed on your ears and made every small sound exaggerated. I started with scales, the notes echoing off the walls, and that's when I heard it, another note, faint, out of place, almost imperceptible at first. I stopped playing. Silence. And it came again, a soft, discordant tone from the far corner of the room, where no instrument was set up. I froze, staring at the shadowed corner, convincing myself it was a trick of acoustics, a note from a neighboring classroom filtering in through the walls. But the sound persisted, repeating, a little louder each time. My hands shook as I moved toward the source, but there was nothing there, only the dusty floor and the long-forgotten music stands. Then came the singing, soft, almost melodic, like someone humming under their breath, but not a tune I recognized. It seemed to come from every corner at once, surrounding me, pressing against my chest. I thought maybe another student had snuck in, but the hall outside was silent. No doors had opened, no footsteps. My own heartbeat was loud enough to drown out everything else, and yet the notes and the hum continued, perfectly timed, unnervingly precise. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge, as if it had been welded shut by some invisible force. I pounded on it, shouted, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the room itself, leaving only the persistent, uncanny music. Instruments around me began to move subtly. A drumstick rolled across a table on its own. Piano keys pressed down without anyone touching them, the notes clanging sharply in the still air. I stumbled back, my eyes wide, convinced that I had stepped into some kind of nightmare. The humming grew louder, now forming words, soft, indistinct, just enough to make me feel like I was being warned or accused. I realized I couldn't make sense of the music. It wasn't playful, not like a student experimenting. It was deliberate, precise, as though the room itself had remembered every rehearsal, every mistake, every note ever played within its walls. And now it was teaching me or testing me. Hours or maybe minutes passed, and eventually the sounds stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The room was silent again, still and empty, leaving only the echo of my own terrified breathing. I didn't speak to anyone about what had happened. I just packed my music, left the room, and never returned after hours again. But even now, years later, when I pass by the music room, I swear I hear the faintest notes drifting through the door, the soft hum of a melody I cannot place, and I wonder if it was ever really empty. If those instruments remember me, if the room is still waiting for someone else to play along, alone in its perfect, eerie rhythm. Story 4. The Library Ghost. Books flew off shelves unexpectedly, and a shadowy figure seemed to linger between the stacks. The library was supposed to be my safe spot, the one place I could hide away between classes and lose myself in books. But that sense of comfort vanished one afternoon. I had stayed behind to return a stack of overdue novels, the usual quiet enveloping me like a soft blanket. The smell of old pages and polished wood was familiar, grounding, until I noticed the first odd thing: a book slid off a shelf without anyone near it, landing with a soft thud at my feet. I froze, half expecting to see a student playing a prank, but the library was empty. Shrugging, I picked up the book, but then another one fell, and another, forming a trail that led deeper between the tall shelves. I followed cautiously, my footsteps echoing softly. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure flitting between the stacks, too fast to get a good look, vanishing when I tried to approach. My pulse quickened, and I whispered, "Hello?" But the figure didn't respond, only moved just out of reach, leading me further into the maze of books. Every time I turned a corner, a book would fall, almost like breadcrumbs, guiding me or luring me. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath visible in the faint light filtering through the high windows. I reached a small reading nook, and there it stopped. The figure wasn't fully visible, just an outline, darker than the shadows surrounding it. I could feel its gaze, heavy and deliberate, pressing against my mind. When I tried to step closer, the books around me rattled on the shelves, not violently, but enough to startle me as though warning me back. I stumbled into the main aisle, and for a moment, everything seemed normal, the shadows no longer shifting, the temperature returning. But then a book hit my shoulder, hard enough to make me spin around. The figure wasn't there anymore, yet I could feel it lingering, watching. I hurried to the checkout desk, only to find a stack of old, forgotten library cards on the counter, each with names I didn't recognize, some dated decades ago. Oddly, each card was positioned neatly upright, as if placed by someone or something with intention. I gathered them and left the library, heart pounding, but couldn't shake the feeling that the figure followed me, slipping silently between the shelves, waiting for the next person foolish enough to stay after hours. Even now, when I pass by the library, I glance at the windows, expecting to see a shadow flitting inside, a book sliding off the shelf, and I wonder if it was ever really empty, if the shelves remember everyone who's lingered too long, if the library still holds those whispers of movement between the stacks, quiet but persistent, waiting for someone to notice. Story 5. The Bathroom Incident. A routine bathroom break turned terrifying when reflections in the mirrors didn't match my movements. The bathroom incident started as something small, almost laughable, but it quickly turned into one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. It was after lunch, a typical day, and I went to the girls' restroom at the far end of the hall. I had just washed my hands and was about to leave when I noticed something off in the mirrors. At first, it was subtle. My reflection lagged just slightly behind my movements, like a delayed video feed. I waved my hand, and for a fraction of a second, my reflection stayed still while I moved. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or my tired brain. But then it happened again, more pronounced. My reflection smiled when I didn't, tilted its head at me, eyes glinting differently. My stomach sank, and I took a step back, only to realize that no matter which angle I moved to, the mirror never fully matched me. It was like there were two versions of the room, one real, one slightly warped, and the warped one was watching me. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands gripping the sink as the sound of dripping faucets grew louder, though all the taps were off. Then came the faint scratching behind me, soft at first, like nails tracing the tiles, growing in rhythm with my own breath. I turned slowly, heart hammering, but there was nothing, just empty stalls. I whispered to myself, "It's nothing, it's nothing." But the mirror confirmed it wasn't nothing. The reflections weren't just delayed. Sometimes they moved independently, glancing at corners I wasn't looking at, tilting toward spaces that were empty. Panic rose, but I tried to stay calm, thinking if I left slowly, it might let me go. I walked backward toward the door, and for the briefest instant, I saw someone or something stand just outside the doorway in the reflection, only to vanish when I looked directly. I bolted out of the bathroom, the sound of my own footsteps deafening, and didn't stop until I reached a crowded hallway where other students milled around, oblivious to the strange presence I'd just encountered. Later, I found small things left behind. Faint fingerprints on the mirror, smudges that couldn't be explained, even though the mirrors had been cleaned that morning. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at mirrors in the school, my pulse rising, expecting that brief, impossible delay in the reflection, that subtle movement that doesn't belong. And I wonder if the bathroom remembers me, if it keeps a piece of everyone who has lingered too long, staring at their own image, unable to move freely, or if I was the first to notice it's never really empty, never really normal. Story 6. The Stairwell Figure. I encountered a figure on the staircase that disappeared as soon as I approached, leaving an icy chill. The gym was always cold at night, colder than it should have been, even in summer. I had detention there once after basketball practice, supposed to sweep the floor and lock up before I left. The coach had already gone home, the lights dimmed to half brightness, the echoes of my broom scraping across the wood, filling the emptiness. It should have been simple cleanup, turn off the lights, go home, but it wasn't. About 20 minutes in, I started hearing footsteps that didn't belong to me. They weren't in rhythm with mine, a soft scuffing sound coming from the far end of the court. I stopped sweeping, and the sound stopped too. I tried to laugh it off, calling out, "Coach?" My voice bounced back at me, hollow. I kept working, but every few minutes, I'd hear it again, footsteps circling me, sometimes closer, sometimes behind the bleachers. The strange part was how they never echoed right. In a gym, sound always carries, but these steps didn't. They were muted, wrong somehow, like whoever was walking wasn't really touching the ground. I decided to prove to myself it was nothing, so I pushed the bleachers back just to check. Dust puffed up into the air, the space empty except for a few stray basketballs and a forgotten shoe. Then one of the basketballs rolled on its own. It wasn't fast, just a slow, deliberate roll from one side of the court to the other, stopping right at my feet. I didn't move. I just stared, my breath catching. When I looked up, the scoreboard flickered on by itself. The numbers glowed red, 0 o'clock. No one had touched it. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the board until a loud bang echoed behind me, like someone had slammed a locker door. I dropped the broom and ran to the locker room, half convinced some prankster was hiding, but it was empty, every locker door slightly ajar, swinging gently as though someone had just brushed past them. That's when I noticed the faint smell of sweat and something metallic, sharp, like blood, but older, stale. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me, and I realized I could hear breathing soft, shallow, uneven. I turned toward the sound and saw a shadow on the wall, long and thin, stretching unnaturally, even though the lights weren't bright enough to cast it. It moved, but I didn't. Then the lights buzzed, flickered, and everything went dark for a few seconds. When they came back on, the shadow was gone, but one of the locker doors had slammed shut, hard enough to echo. I didn't stay to check. I grabbed my things, sprinted to the exit, and yanked the door open. The air outside felt warm again, normal, but the moment I stepped out, I heard one last sound behind me, the faint bounce of a basketball, rhythmic, steady, echoing faintly in the empty gym. Even now, when I pass by that building after hours, I sometimes see the scoreboard flicker on through the glass, glowing with numbers that shouldn't be there. Sometimes it shows a time, like a countdown. Sometimes it just flashes red zeros again and again, like the game never really ended. And I wonder, was it warning me to leave that night, or counting down until someone else stayed behind long enough to find out what happens when the buzzer finally sounds? Story 7. The Forgotten Locker. Opening an old locker revealed personal items from students who had long since graduated, arranged in a haunting pattern. The stairwell was always narrow, cramped, and dimly lit, the kind of place students hurried through between classes without a second thought. But one evening, I stayed late helping decorate for the winter dance, and the stairwell became something entirely different. I was carrying a box of paper chains and lights when I heard it, the faintest shuffle of feet above me. I called out, thinking maybe a teacher or another student had forgotten something, but there was no answer. paused, listening, and the sound continued, slow and deliberate, moving down the stairs toward me. My heart picked up, but when I looked up, the staircase was empty. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to echoes or a delayed sound, and continued down. Then I noticed the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of me, even though it was a mild evening, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A shadow appeared on the steps above me, tall, vague, lacking any real detail, but its presence was undeniable. I froze. The shadow didn't move as I moved. It stayed just out of reach, almost watching, waiting. I tried to call out again, my voice trembling, but the stairwell swallowed my words. I thought about retreating, turning back the way I came, but the shadow seemed to anticipate it, sliding downward a step for each step I took backward. Panic rose, cold and sharp, and I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I reached the bottom landing, and the shadow vanished. I exhaled slowly, convinced it had just disappeared. But then the final step at the bottom creaked, not from my foot, but as if someone had landed there silently. The stairwell felt alive, and I had the sensation of eyes on me from every corner. I hurried out of the hallway and didn't look back, the box of decorations nearly dropping from my hands. Weeks later, I asked classmates if anyone else had noticed strange things in that stairwell. Some laughed, some said they'd seen weird shadows, and one whispered about a janitor who had claimed the steps were haunted by someone who never left. Even now, whenever I climb a stairwell in silence, I feel that same icy press, the sense that someone or something is just beyond my sight, waiting, watching, following silently. And I wonder if it was ever really gone, or if the school simply keeps a memory of everyone who's ever lingered too long in its quiet corners.